This war!
What does it mean to be the greatest? Not just the best player on the court, or the fastest sprinter on the track, but the greatest human being inside the arena of life itself? That's the question that GOAT, the 2026 sports drama that nobody saw coming and everybody is now talking about, plants like a seed in the very first frame and refuses to let go of until the very last. Imagine this. A stadium. 60,000 people on their feet. The roar is deafening, it's physical, like pressure behind your eyes. And in the middle of all that noise, one man stands completely still. Not scared. Not overwhelmed. Just still. Like the eye of a hurricane. And then, the camera, in one of the most quietly devastating moves of 2026 cinema, cuts to his face. And what you see there isn't triumph. It isn't joy. It's grief. Pure, exhausted, inexplicable grief. That image, that contradiction, is the entire movie in a single shot. And if that doesn't make you want to sit down and dig into every single layer of what GOAT is doing, then honestly, I don't know what will. Because this is not just a sports movie. Not by a long shot. This is a film about legacy, about sacrifice, about the terrifying price of being chosen, and about what happens when the thing you were born to do stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like a sentence. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, and today we are doing a full breakdown, and I mean full, of one of the most ambitious, emotionally brutal, and genuinely cinematic films of the year. We're talking story recap, deep character analysis, thematic deep dives, technical craft, the whole 9 yards. So get comfortable, grab something to drink, and let's get into it. This is GOAT, 2026. Section 2, Movie Overview. Stopwatch emoji, narration duration : 5 to 7 minutes. Release, director, and cast. GOAT was released on March 14, 2026, strategic timing, just as the college basketball tournament was kicking off and sports were consuming the national conversation. Distributed by A24, of all studios, which should immediately tell you something about the kind of film we're dealing with here. This isn't a feel-good inspirational romp. This is A24. They don't make Rudy. They make Midsommar. They make Hereditary. They make movies that crawl under your skin and live there rent-free. The film is directed by Darius Marder, the man behind Sound of Metal, that devastating 2020 film about a drummer losing his hearing. If you've seen Sound of Metal, you already know what Marder is capable of: immersive sound design, raw performance-first filmmaking, and an almost clinical obsession with the interiority of human suffering. With Goat, he goes even bigger. Wider canvas. More characters. More noise. And somehow, even more silence in all the right places. The cast is anchored by Kelvin Harrison Jr. in what I will unequivocally call the performance of his career, and this is a man who was already extraordinary in Waves and Loose. He plays Marcus Cole, a 24-year-old basketball prodigy from Louisville, Kentucky, standing on the precipice of becoming the greatest player of his generation. Maybe of all time. The film tracks 2 days in his life, just 2 days, before and after the biggest game of his existence. Supporting him is an absolutely stacked ensemble: Viola Davis as his mother, Diane Cole, a woman who gave up everything for her son's dream and quietly resents him for it. David Oyelowo as Coach Raymond Stokes, a man of towering integrity who may be the film's most tragic figure. Zendaya in a smaller but pivotal role as Marcus's girlfriend, Naomi, who serves as his anchor and, increasingly, his mirror. And then there's Mahershala Ali in a haunting, borderline ethereal supporting role as former NBA legend Joseph Bell, now a shadow of himself, warning Marcus about the future only he can see. The screenplay was written by Marder alongside Terrell Alvin McCraney, the playwright behind Moonlight. That collaboration alone should give you chills. Two of the most psychologically precise writers working today, in a genre that usually settles for crowd-pleasing montages and inspirational speeches. The result is something that feels unlike any sports film made in the last 20 years. Genre and cultural context. Goat operates in the tradition of great American sports dramas, think Raging Bull, Friday Night Lights, Whiplash, and more recently, King Richard. But it deconstructs and interrogates that tradition rather than simply participating in it. Where most sports films celebrate the climb to greatness, Goat asks what greatness actually costs, psychologically, relationally, existentially. Released at a moment in American culture when conversations about athlete mental health were louder than ever, following years of major sports figures speaking publicly about depression, anxiety, and burnout, Goat arrives as a kind of cinematic reckoning. It refuses to sanitize the brutality of elite athletic ambition. It refuses to let triumph be uncomplicated. And in doing so, it says something profound about the American myth of the exceptional individual, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, and whether that myth is something worth chasing. Audience expectations heading into the film were mixed. Sports fans wanted a crowd-pleasing drama. Art house audiences, seeing the A24 label, wanted something challenging and unconventional. What they got was both, and neither. Goat doesn't play favorites. It makes everyone work. And the critical reception reflected that. Rave reviews from serious film critics, some bafflement and frustration from audiences expecting a more conventional experience. Currently sitting at 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, with an audience score of 74%. That gap tells you everything. Section 3, Full Story Breakdown, Scene by Scene. Stopwatch emoji, narration duration, 30 to 35 minutes. Act 1, The Weight of the World Before the Whistle. The film opens not in a stadium or a gym. It opens in a grocery store. Marcus Cole is in the cereal aisle, alone, at 11 p.m., wearing a hoodie pulled low. His phone is buzzing constantly, notifications, calls, texts, and he's ignoring all of it. He's just standing there, staring at a box of Frosted Flakes. Tony the Tiger grinning back at him. And Marcus isn't buying anything. He's just standing the in the cereal aisle. Alone. It's such a disarmingly mundane image for a film about the greatest of all time. And that's the point. Marder is telling us from the very first frame, this man is trying to find something ordinary. Something that doesn't demand anything from him. And he can't even find it in a grocery store at 11 o'clock at night, because within 60 seconds, someone recognizes him and the quiet chatters. A teenage kid, maybe 15 years old, approaches and holds up his phone for a selfie without even asking. Just assumes. Just takes. Marcus smiles, and it's the most painful smile you've ever seen. Perfect teeth. Dead eyes. We cut to the next morning. Marcus's apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is stunning, by the way. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Evidence of extreme wealth everywhere. But also evidence of a man who doesn't really live anywhere. There are boxes that haven't been unpacked. Trophies still in their display cases, sealed, like they arrived and nobody bothered to open them. His NBA championship ring, his second one, sits on the bathroom counter like a bar of soap. Naomi, played by Zendaya, is making coffee. She and Marcus have an easy, lived-in chemistry. Zendaya plays her with such quiet watchfulness, like she's perpetually reading the room, perpetually waiting for Marcus to let her in fully. They have the kind of morning routine that looks like love on the surface but feels, with Marder's camera watching, like two people going through motions they've forgotten the origin of. There's warmth there, genuinely. But there's also distance. A glass wall. Marcus is present in body but somewhere else entirely in spirit. The reason for his preoccupation becomes clear quickly. In 2 days, Marcus will play in what every sports analyst in America is calling the most important regular season game in a decade. His Charlotte team against the defending champion Los Angeles franchise, a game that will effectively serve as a referendum on whether Marcus Cole is, definitively and historically, the greatest of all time. The pressure isn't just about winning. It's about legacy. It's about the record books. It's about whether a 24-year-old man can shoulder the weight of a title that men twice his age are still arguing about. Marder spends a remarkable amount of time, almost 20 minutes, just in the apartment. In the quiet spaces between Marcus and Naomi. In the way Marcus eats breakfast standing up. The way he looks at his phone and puts it down without reading anything. This section is deliberately paced, deliberately quiet, and it's where you either lock in with this film or lose patience with it. If you're used to sports movies that start with a bang, this is going to feel strange. But stick with it, because Marder is doing something incredibly precise. He's establishing the suffocating pressure of Marcus's normalcy, the way even the mundane has become a performance for him. Then Coach Stokes calls. And the movie shifts gears in a subtle but unmistakable way. David Oyelowo's Raymond Stokes is a man of such careful dignity, every word measured, every gesture intentional. He and Marcus have a relationship that is one of the film's great emotional engines, paternal, contentious, profoundly loving, and occasionally explosive. Stokes needs Marcus to come in for an extra practice session. Marcus says he's resting. Stokes says, rest is what happens after. Marcus says, after what? And the silence that follows that exchange lasts about 4 seconds. On a YouTube video, that doesn't sound like much. In a theater, it lands like a stone dropped in deep water. The family dinner, old wounds, new wounds. That evening, Marcus goes home to Louisville. This is the first major set piece of the film and it functions like a controlled implosion. His mother Diane, played by Viola Davis, has organized a family dinner, cousins, aunts, uncles, his little sister Priya, a handful of childhood friends. The house is the house Marcus bought for her, but everything in it is from before the money. Old furniture. Old photos. Old rhythms. Davis does something in this dinner scene that is almost impossibly good. She plays Diane as a woman who is genuinely proud of her son and genuinely furious at what his success has cost her. Not the money, she doesn't care about money. The presence. The closeness. The Marcus she raised, the one who used to fall asleep on the couch watching basketball with her, is gone. In his place is this polished, careful, famous person who floats through the house like a guest in his own history. There's a scene maybe 10 minutes into the dinner, where Marcus starts telling a story about something that happened on the road, some funny incident on a team flight. And everyone laughs. They're charmed. He's wonderful at this, performing connection. And Diane watches him from across the table with an expression that is equal parts love and mourning. Because she sees what everyone else is too dazzled to see, her son is performing. Even here. Even home. The dinner goes sideways when Marcus's cousin Damon, who hasn't spoken to Marcus in 2 years, attention the film only explains in fragments, makes a comment about what Marcus gave up to get where he is. It's vague enough to be ambiguous, sharp enough to cut. Marcus goes still, that same stillness we saw in the opening stadium image. And then he says, quietly, "That's not a conversation for tonight." And Damon says, "When is it a conversation? Because you're never here." And the room goes very, very quiet. What happened between Marcus and Damon? The film doesn't tell you right away. It withholds. And it's right to, because the revelation, when it comes, recontextualizes almost everything you've seen before it. But we'll get there. Just stay with me. What the dinner scene does establish, powerfully and painfully, is that Marcus's ascent to GOAT status has not been a rising tide that lifted all boats. It's been, for the people who love him most, a kind of abandonment. Not intentional. Not malicious. But abandonment nonetheless. And Marcus knows it. You can see him know it. And you can see him decide, in real time, to not look at it directly. Because if he looks at it directly, he might break. And he cannot break right now. He has a game to play. Joseph Bell, A Visit to the Ghost of Christmas Future. The next morning, the day before the big game, Marcus receives an unexpected visitor, Joseph Bell. Mahershala Ali. Wearing a simple linen shirt, moving slowly, carefully. Joseph Bell was, 25 years ago, what Marcus is today, the consensus greatest basketball player alive. 3 championships. 14 all-star selections. Cultural icon. The man whose jersey Marcus wore as a child. And now Bell is 51 years old and he carries himself like a man who has survived something. Like someone who walked through a fire you can't see the scars of until you're close enough. Marcus and Bell have a history. Bell was briefly his mentor, years ago, before Marcus pulled away from the relationship for reasons we gradually understand. Their conversation takes place on Marcus's balcony, overlooking Charlotte. Ali plays Bell with an extraordinary lightness. There's almost a zen quality to him, but it's not peace, exactly. It's more like acceptance that has been very hard won. He's come to talk to Marcus about the game tomorrow, not strategy. Not film study. About what it means. You know what the worst part is? Bell says. Not the pressure. Not even the losing. The worst part is when you win. Because then you have to be the greatest forever. You don't get to stop. You don't get to be nobody's kid anymore. You don't get to be bad at anything. He says it without self-pity. Just as fact. And Marcus listens, and you can see something in Calvin Harrison Jr.'s performance shift. A hairline cracking at perfect exterior. Bell then does something unexpected. He asks about Damon. He knows about the cousin. He knows, it turns out, what happened, or at least the outlines. And this is when the film begins weaving in the backstory through dialogue rather than flashback, and it's a choice that keeps the narrative moving while layering in emotional complexity. We learn, through this conversation, that 3 years ago, Marcus was offered a chance to get Damon a tryout with his team's G League affiliate. A lifeline. A door. And Marcus didn't make the call. He told himself it was for professional reasons, that it would look like favoritism, that Damon wasn't really ready. But Bell, with the gentleness of someone who has done the same thing and lived with it, suggests the real reason was simpler and darker. Marcus was afraid that helping Damon succeed would somehow diminish his own singularity. His own one-of-a-kindness. It's a brutal accusation delivered with such compassion that you don't quite register how devastating it is until it's already landed. And Marcus doesn't deny it. He doesn't confirm it either. He just looks out at the city. And Bell says, "You don't have to be the only one, Marcus. That's not what greatness is." And Marcus says nothing. And the scene ends. This is one of those conversations, the kind great films do, that feels like it's about basketball but is actually about everything else. About scarcity thinking. About what we do to the people we love when we're afraid of being ordinary. About how ambition can curdle, imperceptibly, into something ugly. The night before, Naomi, the mirror. That night, back at the apartment, Marcus and Naomi have the film's most intimate and most painful scene. They've ordered takeout. They're in bed, eating Thai food and watching old game film on Marcus's laptop, which, honestly, is both very relatable and very indicative of how thoroughly basketball has colonized every corner of his existence. And Naomi does something quietly remarkable. She closes the laptop. And she asks Marcus what he wants. Not for the game. Not for his career. Just, what does he want? If he could want anything, right now, tonight, what would it be? And Marcus can't answer. He opens his mouth, and he can't answer. He tries 3 times. You can watch Kelvin Harrison Jr. in real time trying to access something inside himself and finding the well empty. And then, quietly, with a vulnerability that is almost unbearable to watch, I want to want something else. That's all he can say. I want to want something else. Naomi looks at him for a long time. She doesn't cry. Zendaya plays this with a kind of fierce, eyes open heartbreak, the look of someone who has heard the thing they were afraid of hearing and is deciding, right now, what to do with it. She reaches out and takes his hand. And she says, then after tomorrow, we figure out something else.
Always a choice.
It's a quietly heroic thing to say. And it might be the saddest line in the movie, because we know, the way you know things in good tragedies before they happen, that after tomorrow is going to be more complicated than that. Act 2, Game Day, the long walk into the arena. The film's second act is, in structure and execution, one of the most original things I've seen in contemporary sports cinema. Rather than cutting to the game immediately, Marder builds the morning of game day as a kind of slow-motion ritual, a ceremony. Marcus waking at 5 a.m. The pre-game routine, stretching, meditation, the specific music he listens to, Kendrick Lamar and, oddly, Chopin, which tells you everything you need to know about this man's inner life. The drive to the arena. The walk through the parking garage. The way the building receives him, security guards nodding, staff making way, everyone deferring to this single human being as though he emits gravity. And then, the locker room. This is where the film expands its scope and introduces us properly to Marcus's teammates, who have been peripheral until now. And here's where Marder does something genuinely surprising, he makes us care about them. Not in a big dramatic way. In small, specific, utterly human ways. There's Deshaun, the veteran point guard who defers to Marcus on every play but has started, quietly and subtly, to resent it. There's Jonah, the young rookie center from Croatia who barely speaks English and is terrified of everything and is somehow the most likable person in the film. There's Coach Stokes, moving through the room like a minister before a sermon, touching shoulders, speaking quietly, holding the team together through the sheer force of his belief in them. And then there's the press conference. Mandatory, pre-game. Marcus in front of the cameras. And this is where Kelvin Harrison Jr. does something almost theatrical, he switches. You watch Marcus Cole, the basketball player, the GOAT, turn on like a lamp. The smile, the confidence, the easy authority. He says exactly the right things. He's gracious and funny and quotable. He handles every question flawlessly. And it is deeply, profoundly unsettling. Because we've spent an hour with the man behind the lamp. And we know what it costs him to keep it burning. One reporter asks, Marcus, what does it mean to you, personally, if you're officially crowned the GOAT tonight? And Marcus's smile holds. But his eyes do something. Just for a half second. Just the smallest tremor behind the confidence. And he says, it means everything. And you realize, watching that tiny fracture, that he's not lying. It does mean everything. And that's the problem. The game itself, spectacle and silence. Here is where Darius Marder makes his boldest, most controversial choice in a film full of bold, controversial choices. He doesn't show you the game in the way you expect. He shows you moments. Fragments. Flashes. A three-pointer going up and the camera staying on Marcus's face as it leaves his hands, not the ball. A timeout huddle where Coach Stokes is drawing plays on a board and Marcus is staring at the floor, somewhere else entirely. A collision, brutal, physical, Visceral, where Marcus takes an elbow to the face and goes down. The score, by Nicholas Brittle, who also did the Succession score, if that tells you anything about the register we're operating in, shifts during the game from orchestral to almost ambient, electronic, dissonant. The crowd noise ebbs and surges around the music in a way that Marder and his sound team use to simulate what it might feel like to be inside Marcus's head, overwhelmed, tunneled, the crowd alternately deafening and completely muted depending on where Marcus's consciousness is. It's a stunning technical achievement. And it's also, for audiences expecting traditional sports movie game sequences, with clear score updates, mounting tension, last-second heroics in high-def slow motion, potentially alienating. Some of the online criticism of GOAT centers specifically on this choice. Why can't I tell who's winning? Was an actual complaint I read in multiple reviews. And I'd argue that's the point. You're not supposed to know who's winning. You're supposed to feel how disorienting it is to be the man the outcome rests on. What we do get, in full, clear focus, halftime. Marcus alone in the training room, getting his face worked on, the elbow collision opened a small cut above his eyebrow. And Coach Stokes comes in. And they have, in that cramped, fluorescent lit training room, one of the best two-person scenes in the film. Stokes asks Marcus if he's alright. Marcus says yes. Stokes says he's asking because Marcus has been playing scared. Not physically scared. He's fearless physically. He's been playing scared of what happens if he wins. Because you know if you win tonight, Stokes says, every game after this is about protecting that. And you don't want to protect it. You want to be free of it. Don't you? It's not really a question. And Marcus, for the first time in the entire film, doesn't have an answer prepared. He just looks at Stokes. And then he says, what if I don't want it anymore? What if I play this game and win and I just don't want any of it anymore? And Stokes looks at him for a very long time. And then he says, then you finish tonight's game. And then you tell me. And we'll figure out the rest. And the gentleness of it, the absolute lack of judgment, the total steadiness of this man who has built his entire coaching philosophy around the belief that players are human beings first, is devastating. The second half. The game comes back into focus. Marder lets the filmmaking loosen, opens up the camera, lets us feel the rhythm and momentum of basketball as it's meant to feel. Charlotte is trailing by 8 points with 6 minutes left. And Marcus Cole, for the first time in the entire film, stops thinking. You can see the moment it happens. Something releases in his face, the performance drops away, the pressure drops away, and what's left is just a man playing a game he has loved since he was 5 years old. Pure instinct. Pure joy. For maybe 4 minutes of screen time, maybe 10 minutes of game time, he is simply magnificent. The arena goes absolutely insane. 60,000 people. And Marcus scores 14 points in 5 minutes, in a sequence that is kinetic, euphoric, and shot with a handheld intimacy that makes you feel like you're on the court. Marder gets out of his own way here and just lets basketball be beautiful. It's one of the most exhilarating stretches of the film, and it lands even harder because of how measured and deliberate everything before it has been. Charlotte wins by 3. Marcus Cole, in the final analysis, has scored 43 points. And as the buzzer sounds, as the stadium erupts, the camera cuts to Marcus. Standing still. In the middle of 60,000 screaming people. And his face. Oh, his face. That face we saw in the opening shot. Grief. Exhausted, inexplicable grief. Now it makes sense. Now we understand. He won. He got what he wanted. What everyone around him said he needed. What his entire life has been structured toward. And standing in the center of that triumph, what he feels is not joy. It's not even relief. It's the terrible freedom of a man who has just paid off a debt he didn't choose to incur. Act 3. After the whistle, the long walk out.
Let me see
the third act of GOAT is its most intimate and, I would argue, its most important. The game is over. The celebrations are happening. And Marcus moves through them like a man walking through water, present, participating, beautiful to look at, and utterly elsewhere. The locker room celebration. His teammates embracing him. The championship scene, which, in a traditional sports movie, would be the emotional peak, Marder uses as almost background texture. The thing that happens around Marcus while Marcus disappears inside himself. He gives the required interviews. He accepts the MVP trophy. He does all of it correctly, professionally, graciously. And then, when the cameras are gone and the locker room is emptying, he sits on a bench in front of his locker and just breathes.
We have no choice.
Coach Stokes comes to him. No words. At first. Just sits beside him. And then Marcus says, "I think I need to stop." And Stokes says, "I know." Not surprised. Not devastated. Just, as he is throughout this film, steady. Present. A man doing the sacred work of simply being there. He tells Marcus to take his time. To think. To not make any public announcements until he's certain. But he also tells him, "Whatever you decide, Marcus, you gave this game everything it could ever have asked for. You don't owe it anything else." Marcus calls Naomi. Tells her he won. She already knew, she was watching. And then there's a pause, and he says, "I think I meant it. What I said last night. About wanting something else." And she says, "I know. Come home." That's the whole scene. But it's perfect. The final sequence of the film brings us back to Louisville. Not the family house this time, a basketball court in the neighborhood where Marcus grew up. Empty except for Marcus, and, when he arrives maybe 20 minutes later, Damon. His cousin. The man he failed. Marcus asked him to come. This is the apology scene. The reckoning. It's not easy. Damon is not gracious about it, and why should he be? He's spent 3 years carrying the weight of being passed over by the person he loved most and admired most and who had the power, easily, to help him. He doesn't yell. He doesn't cry. He just stands there and says what happened and how it felt. And Marcus receives it. All of it. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't explain. He just listens. And when Damon is done, Marcus says, "I'm sorry. I was afraid. And I chose my fear over you. And that was wrong. And I'm going to spend a long time making that right, if you'll let me." Damon looks at him for a long time. And then he picks up a ball. There was a ball on the court, because of course there was, and he says, "1-on-1. First to 5. And that smile, Marcus's real smile, not the press conference smile, but the actual one, small and crooked and 20 years younger, breaks through. And they play. And the camera pulls back. And the film ends. Not on a championship. Not on a trophy. Not on the crowd. On two cousins, on a court in Louisville, in the late afternoon light, playing basketball because they love it. The way it's supposed to feel. The way it always felt before the world decided one of them was the greatest of all time. Section 4, Character and Performance Analysis. Stopwatch emoji, narration duration, 12 to 15 minutes. Marcus Cole, Kelvin Harrison Jr.
No, he's not for sale.
Let's spend some time with Marcus, because he is one of the most complex protagonists in recent American cinema. What Kelvin Harrison Jr. does in this role is something that I think is genuinely underappreciated in the early discourse around this film. He makes a profoundly interior character legible without ever making him easy to understand. Marcus doesn't explain himself. He doesn't have monologues about his psychology. We have to read him through behavior, through micro-expression, through the way he holds his body in different environments. Harrison Jr. deploys 3 distinct physical registers for Marcus across the film. In public, press conferences, games, social situations, Marcus is expansive, confident, almost leonine. In private, with Naomi, with Belle, with Stokes, he's smaller, more careful, like a man protecting a wound. And then there's the third register, alone. When the cameras are off and nobody is watching. And this is where Harrison Jr. is most extraordinary. Marcus alone is someone who seems to be figuring out how to breathe. Someone for whom stillness is both refuge and trap. The psychological architecture of Marcus Cole is rooted in something the film identifies very carefully, the childhood experience of being exceptional. Marcus was identified as a once-in-a-generation talent at age 7. Think about what that does to a developing human being. When you are extraordinary from the very beginning, when other people's hopes and projections and needs attach themselves to your talent before you even understand what talent is, you never really develop a self that exists independent of the gift. The gift becomes the self. And when the gift is basketball, when everything you are is organized around a sport, the question of who you are without it becomes existentially terrifying. That's Marcus. Not a villain. Not even a deeply flawed person in the traditional sense. Just a man who was loved, fiercely, for what he could do rather than who he was, and who learned, early, that those were the same thing. And who is only now, at 24, beginning to understand they're not. Kelvin Harrison Jr. is going to get an Oscar nomination for this. I'd bet on it. The work is that precise and that deeply felt. Diane Cole, Viola Davis. Viola Davis has won an Academy Award. She has won a Tony, an Emmy, a Golden Globe. She is, by any objective measure, one of the greatest living actresses. And even given all that, what she does in GOAT is remarkable. She plays Diane with a love so specific and so complicated that it defies easy categorization. Diane Cole raised Marcus alone, mostly. His father was present but peripheral, another story for another film. She drove him to practices. She worked extra shifts to pay for camps. She believed in him before anyone else did. And that belief was its own kind of pressure, its own kind of debt, because Marcus absorbed her investment and her sacrifice and carried it with him onto every court he ever played on. The dinner scene is Davis's showcase and she is incandescent in it. The way she moves around that kitchen, efficient, controlled, doing 17 things at once, is itself a performance of a certain kind of love. The love that expresses itself in service because direct expression feels too dangerous. She cannot tell Marcus she's lonely. She cannot tell him she misses him. She can cook the food he loved as a child and set the table and hope that something in the ritual communicates what words won't. And then, late in the dinner, when everyone else has had a little wine and loosened up, there's a moment where Diane catches Marcus watching her from across the room. Just watching her. And something passes between them that is beyond dialogue. Davis and Harrison Jr. holding each other in a look that contains 24 years of complicated love. Davis's eyes fill, just slightly, but she doesn't look away. And Marcus crosses the room and hugs her. Not a public hug. Not a photo op hug. A real one. Brief. Fierce. The kind that acknowledges debt without trying to settle it. It's maybe 40 seconds of screen time. It might be the most emotionally precise 40 seconds in the film. Coach Raymond Stokes, David Oyelowo. I said earlier that Stokes might be the film's most tragic figure, and I want to defend that claim because it's not obvious. He's not the one struggling with identity. He's not the one who made the moral error. But Stokes is a man who has built his entire sense of purpose around the development of other people, and there is a particular loneliness in that. Oyelowo plays him with such controlled authority. Every scene he's in, you feel the gravity of this man's presence, the way rooms reorganize themselves around him. He's the kind of coach who inspires not through charisma but through integrity. Through consistency. Through being, reliably, exactly who he says he is. And that is incredibly rare, and incredibly valuable, and also, the film suggests, incredibly isolating. Because who does Stokes go home to? Who takes care of him? There's a scene late in the film where Stokes is in his office alone, after the game. Just sitting in the dark. His championship banner is visible on the wall behind him. And he's just sitting. Not celebrating. Not planning. Just sitting with the weight of another victory, another year, another young man he helped carry to a destination the young man isn't sure he wanted. It's maybe 30 seconds of screen time. Oyelowo says nothing. And it's heartbreaking. Joseph Bell, Mahershala Ali. Ali's role is essentially an extended cameo. He's in maybe 3 scenes, but he operates in the film the way a tuning fork operates. He sets the frequency for everything around him. Bell is what Marcus might become. He is the future of the GOAT, standing before the present of the GOAT, and offering not a warning exactly, but a testimony. Here is what this is. Here is where it goes. You decide what to do with that. Ali plays Belle with such warmth and such sadness that the combination creates something almost unbearable. This is a man who has made peace with his choices but still feels their weight. He doesn't regret the championships. But he might regret the cost. And the film, wisely, doesn't press him to enumerate that cost. It leaves it in implication, in the particular way Belle moves through Marcus's gleaming apartment, touching nothing, as if he knows that world too well to be impressed by it. Naomi, Zendaya. Zendaya is working in a register she hasn't fully occupied before in GOAT, and it's worth noting. She has done the beautiful and conflicted girlfriend role. She has done the complicated internal life role in Euphoria. But Naomi is something different, a woman of extraordinary clarity. She sees Marcus completely. Not what he performs, not what the world sees, she sees the actual human being. And her challenge throughout the film is figuring out what to do with that clarity.
This goat looks strong.
The film doesn't make Naomi a saint. She has her own needs, her own growing frustration, her own private grief at watching the man she loves disappear into a performance of himself. But she also has a capacity for patience and presence that functions almost as a moral ideal in this film. She is what it looks like to love someone without requiring them to perform for you. And in a film full of people who have demanded performance from Marcus, fans, media, family, coaches, Naomi is the only one who ever just asked him what he wanted. Section 5, Themes, Symbolism and Subtext. Stopwatch emoji, narration duration, 8 to 10 minutes. The myth of the GOAT. The film's central thematic concern is the American cultural obsession with superlatives, with being the best, the most, the greatest. The GOAT concept is fascinating because it's not just a sports designation, it's a cultural mechanism for dealing with excellence in a way that both celebrates and consumes the person it's applied to. To be the GOAT is to be possessed by a title. To become responsible for an abstraction. And the film asks, with real philosophical seriousness, what does that do to a person? Marder and McCrane's screenplay is in direct conversation with the American mythology of exceptionalism, the idea that greatness is not just achievable but obligatory, that the truly gifted owe the world their gifts, fully and without reservation. And GOAT interrogates that obligation. Does Marcus Cole owe his talent to the world? Does the fact that he can play basketball at a generational level mean that he must, indefinitely, continue to do so? The film's answer is complicated and deliberately incomplete. Which is the right answer? The grocery store, the cereal aisle. The opening image, Marcus standing in a grocery store aisle at 11 p.m., recurs twice in the film. Once midway through, as a flash memory during the game. Once at the very end, in the final seconds before the cut to black. And each time, its meaning accumulates. The first time, it's simply strange and lonely. The second time, it's a symptom, a sign of how disconnected Marcus has become from ordinary life. The third time, at the end, it's almost a destination. A wish. A man who wants nothing more than to be able to choose between two boxes of cereal in peace, without the weight of greatness on his shoulders. It's a deeply humane image for a film about superhuman achievement. And it's the film's central symbol, the ordinary as aspiration. The baseline of just living as something Marcus has been denied. The ring on the bathroom counter. The NBA championship ring, sitting on the bathroom counter like it's nothing. This image is so loaded. The ring is the ultimate symbol of achievement in Marcus's sport. And it's sitting on a bathroom counter. Unceremoniously. Like a bar of soap. Like something that got put down somewhere and nobody bothered to move it. This tells us, without a single word of dialogue, how Marcus actually relates to his own achievements. They are real to him in the moment of winning. And then they become objects. Things he owns. Things that represent something he no longer feels. Damon and the Closed Door. The subplot with Cousin Damon is the film's most pointed social commentary. It operates as a critique of how individual success in America is structured to be singular, how the systems that elevate one person often require the suppression of others, and how even the most well-intentioned among us can internalize that scarcity logic and act on it in ways that harm the people we love. Marcus's failure to make the call for Damon isn't dramatic. It's quiet. A phone that wasn't picked up. An opportunity that expired. But it is, the film argues, a moral failure. The moment when Marcus chose to protect his own singularity over someone else's chance. And it connects to the GOAT myth. If you're the greatest, there can only be one. And that logic, the film shows us, doesn't stay on the basketball court. The stillness. Throughout the film, Marcus's stillness functions as the visual grammar of his inner life. In moments of extreme pressure or emotion, he goes still. It's his coping mechanism. His armor. And the film frames this stillness in two different ways. As strength, the stillness of someone who has learned to contain what would overwhelm others, and as damage, the stillness of someone so conditioned to perform composure that genuine feeling can't break through. By the end, when Marcus and Damon are on the court in Louisville and Marcus smiles, the real smile, the small crooked one, the stillness breaks. And it's the most triumphant moment in a film that contains a championship victory. Because it's real. Section 6, Technical and Artistic Review. Stopwatch emoji, narration duration, 7 to 8 minutes. Direction. Darius Marder is operating at the peak of his powers here. His work on Sound of Metal established him as a filmmaker with an almost scientific interest in sensory experience, in what it feels like to be inside a specific body in a specific situation. With GOAT, he brings that same attention to interiority while expanding his scope considerably. This is his most narratively complex film, his most socially engaged film, and his most visually ambitious. His greatest directorial achievement in GOAT is his management of register. The film moves between the intimate and the spectacular without losing its emotional center. The apartment scenes feel like chamber drama. The game sequences feel like concert footage. And the final scene on the court in Louisville feels like documentary. All of these tones coexist in the same film, and Marder holds them in tension rather than resolving them into a single consistent mode. It's a difficult balancing act and he pulls it off. Cinematography. Shot by Pierre Best Performance, the Hungarian cinematographer who did Son of Saul, one of the most viscerally intense camera experiences in recent film history. GOAT's visual language is deliberately raw and physical. Dillihay favors long handheld takes that follow characters through spaces, creating a documentary-adjacent immediacy that keeps even the quietest scenes from feeling inert. The color palette shifts throughout the film in ways that are subtle but meaningful. The apartment scenes are cool, blue-gray, slightly clinical. The family home in Louisville is warmer, amber and honey. The game itself is almost overexposed in places, bleached by arena lighting, which gives it an almost hallucinatory quality. And the final scene on the outdoor court is golden hour gorgeous, the light that cinematographers call magic hour for good reason, warm and soft and forgiving, as if nature itself is offering Marcus some relief. The decision to shoot portions of the game in a style more reminiscent of sports documentary than traditional narrative cinema, following the ball, following the players, letting the chaos be chaotic, is controversial but effective. It prioritizes feeling over clarity, and Marder is comfortable with that trade-off. Sound design and score. This is where GOAT is arguably most indebted to Sound of Metal's legacy. The sound design, by the same team that worked on that film, is extraordinary. The way arena noise is manipulated, swelling and receding, sometimes cutting out entirely to leave a low, almost subsonic hum that represents Marcus's psychological tunnel, is filmmaking at its most immersive. Nicholas Brittle's score deserves its own conversation. Brittle is one of the most interesting film composers working right now. His Succession score alone is a masterclass in using classical forms to explore modern anxieties. For GOAT, he builds a score that lives between orchestral and electronic, between the formal and the ambient. The main Marcus theme is a piano figure that's slightly too fast, urgent, almost agitated, that gradually, over the course of the film, slows down. By the last scene, it's almost a lullaby. It's a compositional arc that mirrors the character arc, and it's gorgeous. Worth noting, the diegetic music choices, what Marcus actually listens to in the film, are perfect and revealing. Kendrick Lamar's The Heart Part 5, which is itself about legacy and identity and what it means to be a black man in America expected to represent more than one man can represent, plays during one of Marcus's pre-game rituals. The Chopin Nocturne he listens to while stretching in the dark. The specific songs on his childhood mixtape that play in the Louisville house. Every musical choice is character revealing. Someone did their homework. Editing. Edited by Mikkel, for example Nielsen, who also edited Sound of Metal, and his fingerprints are all over the rhythm of this film. Nielsen works in what I'd call an elliptical style. He's not afraid of gaps, of cuts that jump over expected information, of scenes that end before their emotional punctuation. He trusts the audience to fill in what the film deliberately withholds. The game sequence editing is the showiest work in the film, intercutting between close-up intimacy and wide-shot spectacle, between present-tense basketball and flash memory fragments, in a way that is both exhilarating and occasionally disorienting. That disorientation is intentional. We are in Marcus's head during the game. And Marcus's head during the game is not a linear, orderly place. Section 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. Stopwatch emoji, narration duration, 8 to 10 minutes. Strengths. Let me be honest about this, GOAT is one of the 3 or 4 best films released so far in 2026. And I don't say that as hyperbole. I say it because the film achieves what it sets out to do with unusual completeness. It asks a serious question and it pursues it seriously. Its performances are extraordinary across the board. Its technical craft is consistently excellent. And it has the courage of its convictions. It doesn't flinch from the uncomfortable implications of its own thesis. The performances, first and foremost. Kelvin Harrison Jr. is giving one of those performances that gets better in retrospect, where, after you've seen the whole film, you go back mentally and reassemble what he was doing in the early scenes and realize how much was already there. How much groundwork was being laid. That kind of performance is exceptionally rare. Viola Davis and David Oyelowo are operating at the level you'd expect from 2 of the finest actors working, and Mahershala Ali in his limited screen time is doing something almost mystical. The screenplay is another enormous strength. MC Craney and Marder have written something that respects its audience. It doesn't condescend, it doesn't explain itself too much, it trusts you to make the connections. The dialogue is consistently excellent, naturalistic and specific and occasionally devastating. The structural decision to compress the narrative into essentially 2 days is bold and effective, creating an intense pressure that never lets up. And the thematic ambition. This is a film that is actually about something. It has a genuine argument to make about excellence and identity and the American relationship to greatness. And it makes that argument through character and story rather than through speech or contrivance. That's exactly how it should be done. Weaknesses. I'm going to be honest here too, because this film has weaknesses, and the conversation around it deserves honesty. The pacing in the first act is going to lose some people, and not all of them will be wrong to feel lost. The film is slow in a way that is deliberate and purposeful, but it demands a patience that not every viewer will be prepared to offer, especially going in with sports movie expectations. The subplot with Damon, while emotionally powerful, is somewhat underwritten in terms of mechanics. We understand what happened and why it matters, but the film gives us relatively little texture about Damon himself, his life, his dreams, his character beyond his relationship to Marcus. He's the film's moral mirror, but he sometimes feels more functional than fully inhabited. Giving him one more scene, maybe a scene that's just him, not in relation to Marcus, might have addressed this. And the Naomi character, while beautifully played by Zendaya, occasionally bumps up against the limitation of how the script positions her. She is, for much of the film, in a reactive role, responding to Marcus rather than driving action of her own. This is a common structural issue in films with singular protagonists, and GOAT isn't uniquely guilty of it, but it's noticeable. Also, and this is a genuine craft critique rather than a subjective preference, the game sequence, while experientially interesting, sacrifices some narrative intelligibility for atmospheric effect. There are moments in the game where you genuinely cannot tell the score, the time left, or what the stakes of specific plays are. For a film that is partly about a championship game, some additional score update clarity might have helped anchor viewers without compromising the experiential approach. Comparisons. GOAT invites comparison to several films, and I think it stands up well against all of them. The most obvious comparison is Whiplash, the 2014 Damien Chazelle film about a jazz drummer and his abusive instructor. Both films are about artistic excellence and its psychological cost. Both are formally rigorous and sonically immersive. But where Whiplash ultimately arrives at a somewhat ambiguous celebration of extremity, that final performance reading as either triumph or tragedy depending on your interpretation, GOAT is clearer and, I'd argue, more humane in its conclusions. It decides that the cost is too high. It chooses the person over the legacy. The comparison to King Richard, the Will Smith film about Venus and Serena Williams' father, is instructive because King Richard is essentially about the opposite proposition, a man who subordinates everything to the development of exceptional talent, and the film largely celebrates him for it. GOAT is asking whether that celebration is warranted. Whether the gift justifies the sacrifice. And it's less certain. I've also seen comparisons to Black Swan, Aronofsky's film about a ballerina's psychological unraveling, particularly in the way both films use the pre-performance period as psychological pressure cooker. The comparison is apt but limited. GOAT is less interested in psychological horror and more interested in psychological inquiry. Marcus isn't breaking down. He's breaking through. And then there's the inevitable comparison to Space Jam, which, look, I'm kidding. Partially. But the point is worth making seriously. GOAT is the corrective to decades of sports films that mythologize the GOAT without interrogating the myth. It's not anti-basketball. It loves basketball. But it loves the people who play it more. Section 8, Final Verdict and Rating. Stopwatch emoji, narration duration, 5 to 7 minutes. What this film is really about. I've talked a lot about basketball. I've talked about excellence and legacy and the GOAT myth. But let me step back and tell you what I think GOAT is ultimately, at its core, about. It's about the right to be ordinary. It's about the right to want something other than what you're best at. It's about the radical proposition, and in America, it is radical, that being the greatest at something does not obligate you to keep doing it. That talent is not destiny. That the gift belongs to the one who was given it, not to the audience that benefits from watching it deployed. Marcus Cole's quiet decision at the end of this film, not to retire, necessarily, but to recognize that he needs something else, that basketball cannot be the whole of who he is presented not as defeat but as the beginning of something. As the first real choice of his life that was made entirely for himself. And the film asks us to celebrate that. To see that as the real achievement. Not the 43 points. Not the championship. But the man on the court in Louisville, playing one-on-one with his cousin in the Golden Light, because he loves the game, not because the game owns him. That is a message that American sports culture, American culture, period, desperately needs. We consume exceptional people. We celebrate them and we demand more and we move on when they falter or retire or simply stop being exceptional in exactly the way we need them to be. We rarely ask whether they're okay. We rarely consider what they've given up. And GOAT, for 90 minutes, forces us to sit with those questions in the company of characters rendered with such specificity and love that we can't look away. Who this film is for. If you are a basketball fan who wants a straightforward, crowd-pleasing sports drama with clear game sequences and a triumphant ending, GOAT will frustrate you. It is not that movie. It has those elements, but they're embedded in something more demanding and less comforting. If you are someone who loved Whiplash, Sound of Metal, Moonlight, or King Richard, and specifically loved those films for their psychological depth and their willingness to complicate easy narratives, then GOAT is made for you. It will reward your attention generously and give you things to think about for days after you leave the theater. If you are someone who knows what it feels like to be exceptionally good at something, to be identified with a talent, to have people love the thing you do more than they love you, then GOAT might be the most seen you've felt in a movie in years. Final rating. I'm giving GOAT a 9 out of 10. That 1 point off is for the minor weaknesses I mentioned, the underwritten Damon subplot, the occasionally opaque game sequences, The slightly reactive positioning of Naomi. These are real limitations. They prevent the film from being the flawless masterpiece it occasionally seems to be reaching for. But the 9 is earned by everything else. By Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s extraordinary performance, career best, full stop. By Viola Davis doing what Viola Davis does, which is to say, something that no one else could. By David Oyelowo's quiet, devastating Stokes. By Marda's courageous, precise direction. By a screenplay that treats sports drama as a vehicle for genuine philosophical inquiry. By Nicholas Brittle's beautiful score. By the final image, 2 men, a basketball, a court, and the late afternoon light. GOAT is the kind of film that reminds you what movies can do when everyone in the room is operating at full capacity and nobody is trying to play it safe. It's not comfortable. It's not always easy. But it's alive in a way that most of what we get at the multiplex simply isn't. And it has something to say. Something worth hearing. So, go see it. Or stream it, when it gets there. Watch it twice, if you can. And the next time someone calls an athlete the GOAT, with that easy reverence, that unexamined certainty, maybe you'll think about what that title weighs. And who's carrying it. And whether they were ever asked if they wanted to.